We're rolling along on this National Signing Day here. We'll crack the phones open again in a little bit, but we got to bring in the man of the hour. This might be his national holiday. We got Mike McAllister with us. This has got to be the biggest day of the year. You got cooking here, Mike, huh?
Yeah, it's recruiting Christmas.
And right here before Christmas, and my goodness, it's crazy because I don't think all that much unusual happened today, but it felt like anything could happen at any moment all day long.
Yeah, it did, and, there was a lot of chatter about KJ Bolden and his potential flipping. Now, a lot of the chatter was surrounded around Georgia, but, there was some modicum of hope that potentially Syracuse could shock the world and get him to flip his commitment from Florida State to Syracuse. And, he did visit Syracuse, so there is that, but ultimately he ends up going to Georgia, staying in state, but otherwise, you didn't really lose any of the highly touted guys that you had brought in, and there weren't really any major surprises either. So kind of if you can call this ho-hum, kind of a ho-hum day to some extent, even though ho-hum is still as good as we've seen around here in quite some time.
Yeah, ho-hum adds into everything that we saw the last 2 weeks, which a lot of it came to fruition with those guys that flipped within the last week and a half, signing their letter of intent today. A guy like King Joseph Edwards making his commitment last night. Listening there to Fran's press conference, Mike, any major takeaways for you out of that, of things you heard going forward?
Yeah, the number one thing that I heard that I thought was the most intriguing, and, I was trying to get my hand up to ask a follow-up and it didn't get to me, and I'm surprised no one else did, but he said part of his pitch to Jamie Tremble was the fact that he'd get to learn under Aronde Gaston.
Yeah.
Well, the only way that's going to happen is if Aronde Gaston's coming back. So is that a foreshadowing of the fact that there's at least somewhat of a realistic chance that he does come back, which I think most people were kind of under the assumption that he was probably going to go pro, or at least that, if you had to guess one way or the other, that's, I think, what most people would have guessed. So, that to me, with everything they've brought in, if Aronde comes back, you start to look at the weapons they got with those new receivers that they have, that they're bringing in, with Aronde Gaston potentially coming back, with Quint Allen. Now you throw a couple of linemen in there to go along with Kyle McCord, and all of a sudden you've got a pretty legit offense. So I think that was one of the more notable things. And then, I think the fact that he shouted out his staff quite a bit and sort of lauded their efforts during the recruiting process, I think was pretty good. And specifically mentioning the creative staff that comes up with all the graphics and all the videos and things like that, I thought was pretty cool. And then, at the very, very end, he mentioned to us, hey, I want you guys to talk to my assistants and set up interviews with them and get their voice out there because I want them to all become head coaches at some point. That's a lot different than what we've experienced in the past, and I thought that was a pretty cool thing, so I'm going to try to take advantage of that as much as I can, for sure.
Barely, at least in a capacity that gets heard by the public. I've barely gotten to converse with the assistants, since Scott Schaefer was here, and even then that wasn't all of them. So it's been a while since you've gotten to talk to the full realm of the staff openly, conversations and whatnot, but openly in ways me, Mike, all the media out there will be able to bring to all of you. So we're looking forward to that. Mike McAllister with us. Mike, you mentioned offensive linemen, and I think we've seen here in the last day and a half, 2 days, we're starting to see multiple portal offensive linemen that have been offered by Syracuse. So what are the tea leaves telling you about what's going on with the offensive line right now?
Well, they certainly understand that it's a priority, and I think that's the thing you can take away from the offers is that they do understand that, and they do know that they need help in that area. So I would be encouraged if you're a Syracuse fan that was concerned about that. That's kind of how I would look at it. But there's his name is escaping me at the moment. But there is an offensive lineman transfer from Michigan State.
Kevin Wigington is the name.
He's announcing at 5:30 tonight, so I would keep an eye on that. If something does happen, of course, we'll have coverage for you there. But he's a New Jersey guy. So obviously, anytime there's a New Jersey guy that's in a position of need, you immediately think, and he's got a Syracuse offer. There's obviously some tea leaves potentially there, but you want to be careful about not over-reading into some of those situations. He hasn't visited that I'm aware of, but I haven't seen him post that he's visited anywhere. But if you are able to land that guy, he's got multiple years of eligibility left. He's 6'5", 320, and he's got a bunch of Power 5 offers from when he hit the portal. So I think that tells you he'd be quite a get if they were able to get him. But, again, back to your point, this is the biggest thing between now and the February signing day is trying to get as much offensive line help as they can. They're going to look at other positions, of course. I think corner is a position where they could potentially bring someone in with experience that could help them. But otherwise, I think with what they brought in, offensive line is clearly the number one spot. Potentially defensive tackle is another one as well that maybe they could look at.
Obviously, they flipped the one defensive tackle earlier today, Murad Watson, who it looked like he came down to Syracuse and Tennessee, which is good company to be in when it comes to the big guys up front. Any other guys in the portal that are sticking out? What's his name? A.J. Harris out of Georgia. I mean, I imagine like everybody in the country is going to be after this guy as a corner coming out of Georgia. Obviously, Fran would have coached him. Like, does Syracuse have a shot at somebody like that, or is it going to be like that's going to be like everybody's going for this guy?
Well, everyone is going to go for him, and just like there's a wide receiver out of Texas A&M, Stewart, I think is his last name. He was, an elite recruit as well. Now, I know Syracuse has brought in already, a couple of transfer offensive linemen, and they brought in a couple of highly touted recruits, or not offensive linemen, I should say wide receivers. They brought in a couple of highly regarded transfer wide receivers. They brought in a couple of high school wide receivers that are pretty highly touted. So do they have room for another one? But I'm not sure you have the ability to turn away a talent like that. So, that's one that I've thought of as well. So, yes, everyone in the country is going to go after those schools. But you know what? Or after those players. But you know what I just saw? I just saw one of the best defensive linemen in the transfer portal visit Alabama, then Syracuse, and choose Syracuse. So I'm not going to say that anything is impossible with what I've seen Fran Brown do in the last couple of weeks. Would it be extremely difficult? No question. But, again, you just had someone visit Alabama, then Syracuse, and pick Syracuse. I would say nothing is off the table. Why not go for it if he's at a position of need and he's extremely talented and can help your program?
Yeah, you're talking about Fadil Diggs. He was in Tuscaloosa on Friday. He was in Syracuse on Saturday. His brother committed here on Monday, and he committed here yesterday. So that's a big weekend. And, talking to some people I know down in College Station, Mike, they say, like, Syracuse fans are just going to love Fadil Diggs, a great leader, great player, the whole deal. So that's big going forward. We've already seen, class of 2025, names starting to pop up a little bit. When do you think we're going to see, full focus here from Fran turn toward that versus portal stuff, wrapping up this year's class?
I think you'll start seeing a little bit of that after the early signing period is over, but certainly you're still going to see a focus on transfer portal and potentially some other 2024 recruits maybe that don't sign early and are still available. We know that Marcellus Barnes is making his decision on January 6th, so I think they're going to keep recruiting him until that decision is final. But yeah, I think you'll start to see that a little bit, and then where you'll really see it is after you get through the February signing day. Usually sometime after that or right around there, you have a junior day, which is as many recruits as you can possibly get from that 2025 class are going to come up to your school and hang out for a day or two. And that's where you'll start seeing, you'll start seeing some big names coming up on that list, and that'll tell you, where they're aiming as far as the 2025 recruiting class goes. Right now they've got, I think, per 24/7 Sports, when you do the combination of the high school and transfer, I think they got the 34th best class in the country. That would be the second best they've ever had. 29th was the best that they've ever had. And he's only been at this for a couple of weeks. So you give him a full cycle, I think you've got a chance at a top 25 recruiting class at Syracuse.
They're going to need a lot of hibachi for that junior day, I think, going forward here. They did keep I guess a decent chunk would be the best way to describe, of the verbals from Dino's class. What is your best understanding? And I know Fran talked about that a little today, Mike, of how Fran handled that process, because that's obviously always a little awkward when there's a coaching change.
Yeah, it is. But I liked what he said during the press conference about that, about, the ones that decommitted, that, when he talked to them, he was honest with them about where they stood within, how he saw them fitting into their system or didn't fit. But he wasn't going to allow them to, he wasn't going to sort of just say, I'm pulling your scholarship, you're gone, without at least making sure they had other options and other places to go. So the fact that they weren't players that he was tied to and no one that he recruited or had established relationships with, and still cared enough about them to make sure they were taken care of before, the two parties decided to part ways. I think that says a lot about what Fran Brown is, what he's like as a person, and I thought that was a really interesting approach to it. But the fact that he also was able to keep several of their high-profile commits that they had from the Dino Babers class, the Jamie Trembles and the Jakari Williams and, some of those guys, I think that speaks pretty highly to Fran's ability to develop these relationships really quickly in an expedited fashion and have them buy into his vision, even if it is a little bit different than perhaps what that vision was under Dino Babers. So all in all, I think he handled that about as well as you could expect, given the awkwardness of the situation.
Yeah, and go figure, both just the irony of ironies, right, that both Tremble and Williams are from Georgia, where obviously Fran was down there the last couple of years. All right, Mike, before we let you go, give us a little on Jakari Williams. You always want to know about the quarterback in the class. He's a very different type of player, it looks like, am I wrong, than Kyle McCord. So I'm still trying to get a sense of, what type of quarterback they're going after here in the future, year in and year out.
I think they're just going after the best quarterback they can get. And, if that means that it's a more pocket quarterback, like pro-style quarterback like Kyle McCord, then that's what they'll get. If it's a mobile dual threat type quarterback like Jakari Williams, then that's what they'll go get. And that's really what Jakari Williams is. He's rushed for over 1,000 yards 2 years in a row, double-digit rushing touchdowns 2 years in a row. He's got a really big arm. He can make all of the throws. He's got to work on, accuracy a little bit. On some of the intermediate stuff, and I think they can work on his footwork a little bit in the pocket and things like that. And obviously, when you have a young quarterback who's as athletic and gifted as a runner as he is, early in their career, there tends to be a tendency to go through 1-2 reads and then try to take off and make a play. So they'll try to, early in his career, try to get him out of that before they throw him into meaningful game action. But the good news is he won't be forced into it. He'll be able to sit behind Kyle McCord for a year and then go from there. But there's no question the potential for this kid is through the roof. He said this guy has the potential to be the face of Syracuse football. And I don't think he says that unless he really likes the talent that he brings to the table. So I was very high on him when he committed to Dino, and I think Syracuse fans should be excited that he's still part of the class.
Yeah, and then Fran will probably try to go out-recruit that at that spot next year, so that'll be something to keep an eye on going forward. All right, Mike, thanks for joining us on your Christmas. Do enjoy the actual Christmas coming up next week, and I'm sure we'll talk again before too long.
You as well, Brian. Appreciate it.
All right, there goes Mike McAllister. 'Tis his Christmas, my oh my. What a day. What a day for Syracuse football. And it's crazy because realistically, like all the exciting stuff that happened today didn't actually happen today. It happened in the lead up over the course of the last 2 weeks. But when it's all finally presented on the platter and you see it all at once and get to hear from the head man, it is in many ways, maybe, in pre-ranking times and whatever, but in the time of rankings, in the time of National Signing Day being a thing, this is by far, without question, by leaps and bounds and miles, the biggest National Signing Day for a wide variety of reasons in the history of the Syracuse football program. With that, we take a break. Hour 2 is next. Phone lines open for a brief bit, and then we'll talk a little Buffalo Bills with our guy Chris Brown. 305-437-7644 for ESPN 44. We're back after this. It's QSportsTalk.com and ESPN Radio.